But what we're really here for today is to hear about the Shenandoah. Our speaker today, Wesley Bishop, has come to us from Alabama. So how about that? He came in yesterday, where he is a historian, writer, and editor. He's currently working on a book about the USS Shenandoah. I have been curious about that. Have you ever seen the marker on 77 South? That I've just been so intrigued by that, and when I discovered that this month is the 100th anniversary of the crash, the disaster, I felt so lucky that Mandy happened to know this guy. he's researched in our archives here, so we're very lucky that he was willing to come back today. He's an assistant professor of American and Public History at Jacksonville State University in Jacksonville, Alabama. His book, also of interest here in Massillon, The Long March of Coxey's Army. So 2 books in the works. That will be forthcoming in 2026, no, 2026. It's kind of an old book. Didn't sell well, I guess. We're still promoting it. That's being published by the University of Illinois Press. So I hope you'll give a very warm welcome to Wesley Bishop.
Thank you so much. Let me make sure. How's this? Check, check. Better? Good? I'm very loud, so we can, yeah. Thank you all so much for having me. Like I said, my name is Wesley Bishop. I'm an assistant professor of American and Public History at Jacksonville State University in Alabama. I am originally from Ohio, though, so I'm originally from southeastern Ohio and went to Shenandoah High School. So this is actually when I first started to learn about the Zeppelin, was in high school. And so it was one of those things when you grow up with it, it's like, yeah, whatever, that's whatever happened, right? Local history, right, can definitely be like that. And it wasn't until I got to college, went to Ohio University, and I started working on my senior thesis paper that I was trying to figure out something to do. I knew at that point I was already interested in public memory and public space. And so I proposed it to my advisor. I was like, I don't know, there's like this like balloon thing that like wrecked where I'm from. Would this be something of interest? And he was really excited about it, and he was actually very, very encouraging. And so I worked on that and then went off to do my master's degree and my PhD and really put it on the back burner. My research really focuses on public space and social movements, how social movements use public space. And so my dissertation was on Jacob Coxey and Coxey's Army, which is how I first came to be associated or known and work with the museum here. Came up here several different times, right, to do the research for the dissertation. So this has been kind of a passion project, and so now that the Coxey's Army book is done, it will be coming out early next year, I'm kind of turned back to this, which has been kind of like just following me through my school career. And so yeah, if you have any publishers, let me know, because we're looking for one. If you have any questions, this is my email. I'm always happy to talk to the public. That's what I get paid to do at the university. People, especially with something like this, have a lot of stories around it. People were bringing in artifacts and memorabilia. There's a lot of them around Ohio and also around the country. So if people are generous enough, right, you can see some of the pieces, right, in the memorabilia that it was made into. So today we're going to be talking about a couple different concepts, right? The concepts that we'll be discussing are vandalism, a very loaded term, and then 2 terms that are used in public history called democratic memory and authoritative memory. And as we're going to see, this has nothing to really do with politics, right? But more to do with how we think about memory, how memory gets created, who's responsible for the maintenance of that memory, and then finally, of course, the history of the USS Shenandoah. So democratic memory, let me see if I can turn here. Yeah, so democratic memory is more organic. When we talk about democratic memory in public history, we're talking about memory that community or individuals do without really any kind of directive. The most common type of democratic memory that you will see, and lots of people have researched and written about this, are the markers that you see along interstates or roads where there's been an unfortunate accident and someone has been killed, right? Those are maintained by family. friends, loved ones. The state does not. Now, the state usually leaves them alone, right? I actually did an internship with ODOT one summer, and it was a whole thing of like, if there is, and you need to move it, right, to like get to something, you have to put it back. And you try to keep it, right, undisturbed, pretty much as long as people are maintaining it, right? I mean, there are exceptions to that if it has to be moved, right? But that's an example of democratic memory. No one is paying anybody to do it, right? It's just something that people kind of do organically, right? It's community-based, it's individual-based. Authoritative memory is the opposite of that. Authoritative memory is memory that has been directed by an entity. Most typically governments, but it can also be things like a museum, right? Or a civil organization, right? That is kind of formalized. And what makes authoritative memory really fascinating is that it comes with all kinds of stipulations, right? It's not just if I wanted to go and put a marker out and said I was the captain of the USS Shenandoah, free speech, right? I can do whatever I want, right? And this always shocks students, right? Yeah, you can just say whatever you want in a historical marker if you pay for it. But if it's authoritative memory, it comes with all kinds of stipulations, right? Where are you getting your funding from? Is it historically accurate? Has it been reviewed? And so one of the best examples I can think of with authoritative memory is when you go to Washington, D.C. and you go to the World War II Memorial, it's not just authoritative in the sense of a government put this up, right? It's formalized, it's been reviewed, but also there are all kinds of instructions of how you're supposed to interact with it. That's another aspect of authoritative memory, where you're told you should do this in order to honor the memory. For example, with the World War II Memorial in DC, you'll see signs like no skateboarding, no selfies, right? Don't climb on this, right? Like all of these different things, stay off the grass, right? Those kinds of things. Democratic memory doesn't contain that, right? When you see a marker that's contained democratic memory, there's really not a lot of instructions with it, right? You get to kind of interact with it however you want. Like I said, textbooks also, I mean, anything that is coming from an authoritative source is an authoritative memory. So the question I have for you all, right, maybe just like one or two responses that I want you to think about is, which is more just? Now that seems like an odd question to ask, and when I tell students this, they're always like, well, whatever is most accurate. But in public history, it's not just the accuracy that is important. You also want to make sure that you are doing honor to your subjects and the community you're representing. So if there was a massacre in your community, right, and you want to put up a marker or a monument, you do need to take into account how is this going to impact the community. And governments really want to know this as well, right? Is this something that's going to be contentious, that they're going to constantly have to hear about, right? Or is this something that the community is actually going to support? So what do you think? Which is more just, democratic or authoritative memory? Authoritative, why?
It takes into account everybody's feelings about it.
Okay.
Whether they all agree on it, the majority would agree.
Okay, so there's some kind of consensus, perhaps. All right? Democratic, who said that? Hi. Why democratic?
Because we are in a state or a country where we can express our feelings, and that way you're giving more, freedoms.
Sure.
To be able to express what it is that you are feeling at that particular time. It may not last forever, but at that particular point in time, you want to pay, respect or something to a particular incident.
People talk about this with democratic memory. It carries a level of sincerity, right? It's like, why else would somebody be doing this unless they actually believe it, right? Whereas authoritative memory, right, often can be more accurate, but has been run through several committees, right? Has been tested, all of that. I'll tell you, it's interesting. We're going to play with this, right? There's really no right or wrong answer, right? This is very much an opinion-based question. But when I ask students this, and I take this talk a lot to high schools and middle schools to get them interested in history, students and the general public often gravitate towards democratic memory. They see it as more authentic. They see it as like less being told what to do. And there are many, many historians who work in public history who agree with this. What I find fascinating about the Shenandoah is the Shenandoah really offers a challenge to that, right? Where if it's democratic memory, is it actually the most just memory? And we're going to discuss it. We're going to discuss whether or not you think that. So a little bit of the history of the USS Shenandoah, right? So it is a Zeppelin. And so Zeppelins actually come out of Europe. Balloons were a thing, right? People had figured out, right, by the time we're in the 19th century easily, right, that you could get lift, right, if you used hot air, right, you could get it to expand, it could lift. And almost immediately, and this is true with, we're seeing it currently with space, right, with air, land, sea, anytime you have a machine that is going to be able to do things and really dominate a sphere, the government automatically becomes interested in it. And we're seeing this right now with computers, right? I mean, the whole rise of generative AI, right? Almost immediately, governments and militaries are like, we would like to understand this because this has a use for us. So in Germany, in the late 1800s, you see the rise of Zeppelins, which are rigid airships. These are balloons, not really, but they have metal frames, right? Metal or wooden frames, where you actually put the material, right? The fabric material around it. You use a gas that's lighter than air, and that achieves lift. Balloons were a problem, and how many of you have been to like a hot air balloon festival? Yeah, exactly right. And you see as they're like putting them up, right, they're like flopping around, right? They're not the most stable, right, airships. And so what governments wanted to do is they wanted something more permanent in the air where they could assert dominance, right, over other nations. Germany, right, is very quick out the door with this. And Friedrich von Zeppelin, right, designs a ship, a Zeppelin, right, a dirigible, and this becomes kind of the standard, right? This is why we call it Zeppelins, right? It becomes kind of a catch-all, right? In the same way that we use tissue or Kleenex, right, or Tylenol, right? It's a specific design that becomes known as the kind of basis for all of the technology. Like I said, the basic idea is that the airship could fly over a city or other target and bomb and attack from above, right? You could dominate nations and enemies, right, from the air. So it was kind of like a flying fortress idea, right? Like you have this like massive fortress, this stake that a nation has claimed in the sky, and as a result of this, they're able to dominate other people. But there are two issues. There are two issues with Zeppelins, and it was the same issues with balloons. Does anybody care to guess what? Weather, and what was the other one? They can't move fast, right? So if you're in a military situation and you have artillery firing at you, you're in trouble, right? Now the goal was, the idea was, well, we'll just go super high, right? And that just made people build powerful guns to shoot higher into the air, right? So artillery was an issue, especially with these Zeppelins. They were several hundred feet long, right? They are easy targets. And then also weather, right? The sky, right? If you have a balloon, right, that isn't moving that fast, that doesn't have that powerful of engines, right? A storm comes along, it can completely knock it off course if you're lucky, or rip it apart, right? As is the case with many of these ships. So there's also the issue that heavier than air technology is catching up and able to move faster than lighter than air. This was something that was treated very skeptically by governments, particularly the United States, that you would have something, an airplane, right, that was heavier than air, that used an engine that would be able to have massive amounts of power. The US government simply did not think that heavier than air was going to have any kind of staying power, right? They were too unreliable, right? The engines were cutting out. Many aeronauts, right, died as a result of this. And so it was a hard sell for governments, particularly in the United States, that heavier than air was going to be the way of the future. However, there were several people in the Navy, this is where the Air Force kind of grows out of, who were like, no, heavier than air is going to be the future, right? These more powerful machines that can actually combat storms, that can move quickly, right, that can dodge artillery, that's going to be the future. And so as a result of this, Zeppelins very quickly are surpassed in terms of technological use. However, their sheer size and what they could do psychologically to an enemy, and just how they are, I hate to put it so unprofessionally, but cool. They just are cool looking, right? Governments were like, this is the thing we want. We want the big thing that everyone's going to be able to see in the air. So, like I said, the government doesn't understand all of these issues. There are pro-LTA lighter than air factions within the military, and there are pro-heavier than air factions within the military. And like anything in government, right, they fight it out. There's also an anti-spending, right, during the 1920s. Calvin Coolidge, pictured here, President of the United States, by far one of the most conservative presidents the United States has ever had, was very, very fiscally conservative and did not want to spend money on anything that he thought we didn't need. And for him, he was like, why are we doing this? Like, I don't understand what the point of any of this is. And so, yeah, he drags his feet quite a bit on investing in air power, and then also parts of the U.S. Navy because of cost, right? Definitely this is an age of isolationism, right? He's like, I don't understand, like, why are we doing this? And so what you kind of get in the 1920s is this back and forth, right? Where the government, in terms of the federal government, are not investing as much as maybe they should have been. And on top of that, this kind of lighter than air phenomena is going to carry the day just by inertia, right? Because people in the military who are in power are going to want to invest in it. And also the public likes them, right? The public thinks they look cool. So this is Rear Admiral William Moffett. He was a supporter of some innovation when it came to air power, but he largely did not think that air power was ever going to amount to much. And so was very much a Navy man. And he did like the Zeppelins, though. I will say this: like, he was a big supporter of the Zeppelins. So much so, he actually dies in one of the wrecks, the very last Zeppelin that the United States has. He dies, and when he dies, so does the Zeppelin program. He was really the last holdout in the U.S. military and U.S. government for lighter than air. But he is a big reason why heavier than air was kept back in the United States, and why lighter than air was disproportionately invested in. So the U.S. Zeppelin program, so the U.S., like many nations, Germany, et cetera, right, is entering this race to weaponize air technology. Like I said, by the time of Calvin Coolidge, though, we're moving a little bit slower. 1920s, the United States has a huge supply of helium. Actually sits on most of the reserves of helium in the world. And so as a result of this, the United States is well posed in terms of lighter than air technology, because does anybody know what was used in other parts of the world? Hydrogen. And what does hydrogen do? Boom, right? It blows up. It's a very unstable gas. Helium is extremely stable, right? It's actually a very stable gas. And so as a result of this, the U.S. is going to have a near monopoly early on with a stable gas that it's going to be able to use in its lighter than air technology. So they begin, the U.S. begins lighter than air weapons, and then slowly into jet power. You have the USS Shenandoah, which largely is in operation from 23 to 25. The USS Los Angeles, 23 to 32. The USS Macon, which is 31 to 35. And the USS Akron, 31 to 33. I will tell you, the Los Angeles is the only one that does not wreck and kill its crew, or large members of its crew, and that's because it was constantly damaged, right? So they would try to take it out, it would get damaged, they'd have to take it back to the hangar, do repairs, they'd take it back out, it would get damaged, they have to take it back and repair it, right? But all the other three are going to wreck pretty horrifically and kill, if not all, some, a good portion of their crew. And like I said, the Akron is going to be the last one where, Moffett, where Rear Admiral Moffett is on it. And when it wrecks, it's pretty much done at that point. The U.S. is going to stop investing in it. By that time, you've moved into the FDR administration, and Roosevelt definitely was like, this is not working, right? And so there is kind of a move, right, to actually invest in heavier than air. So all of these ended in disaster, right? And so this raises the question, and students often ask me this, like, why then did they build 4 of them? Why did they keep insisting on them? To understand this, I think actually there's a really good, he's like a journalist, science philosopher, Ed Regis. He has this term called pathological technology. And pathological technology, what Regis says, is that it is a type of technology that does not work. It is a dead end. However, for whatever reason, it fascinates a government or a public, and they continue to invest in it. And the pop culture reference to this is the Death Star, right? If you've seen any Star Wars film, it's every other film. The government tries to build a Death Star, and they always get blown up. And you're like, why do they keep investing in this thing, right? This is a dead-end technology. But the idea of having that much power that could dominate space, right, is too alluring for governments to give up. And that is the case with the Zeppelins, right? Even though they are essentially death traps, right, that are, you get on these things and you're taking your life out of your hands, right, and just like hope this works, they are so big and so powerful, or at least imposing in terms of psychology, that people continue to want to see them. So the U.S. government is specifically going to put its hopes on the USS Shenandoah. It is the flagship, and they like to show it off. It sends it on several PR missions. There's a case where they have an association of governors, right? Different governors of the states where they meet. They still do this, right? They meet and have a conference, and they take it, and they're like, hey, heads of all various state governments, would you like a ride in this thing? And they're like, sure. And so they're just like flying governors around in this thing. National Geographic reporters would fly with it as well and write stories. And so big thing that they want to do, though, is take it to county fairs. Take it to county fairs, park that thing by the rides and the concession stands, and people will be like, wow, our government is spending our money, right? And it's this cool thing, right? And the crew can come down and talk to people. And so it is a PR boom for the U.S. government and the U.S. Navy. So Colonel Billy Mitchell, who is an early air theorist, right? He's a Navy guy, but he has moved into air technology. He is critical of this approach. He argues throughout his career that Moffett and Coolidge, and this is what's going to get him in trouble, are not taking air technology seriously. And more damningly, he's saying that they're putting servicemen in danger, right? They're getting people killed because they're not taking it seriously. So he was a loose cannon in the military. Every era of government has one, right? Where it's like, if a reporter found him and asked him what he was thinking, he would be sure to tell you everything that he thought, right? And give his opinion. He was very prone to criticize power ahead of him, or above him, I should say. And if you know anything about the military, that will get you court-martialed, right? And that's what's going to happen. And he argued, like I said, the government and military leadership was not adequately preparing the U.S. for air defense. He said, we fought in World War I, right? There's going to be another World War. And so in 21, Mitchell and others in the military, to give you an example, right, of how these things would go down, they run an exercise to see if heavier than air technology could sink a large naval ship. People like Moffett, right, and Moffat's there during this test, say, heavier than air can't do it. There's no way. There's no way that heavier than air can sink a ship. Because at this point, we're talking like biplanes, right? They're like incredibly small like vessels, right? And you're talking about a big, massive naval ship. So the U.S. had captured a German ship from World War I. And Mitchell insists it could. Heavier than air could sink a battleship. So they had gotten this from the Germans, right, and surrender, and they're like, well, we're not going to do anything with it. Let's blow it up, right? So what they do is they take it out into the ocean, right, and they run military tests, right? And so the test is, can Mitchell and his squadron sink this ship? And he does, right? They actually use bombs and sink it. However, Moffett plays it down in the press and says, well, no, actually it doesn't count because he broke the rules of engagement. And so what was happening is they were dropping bombs, right, onto the ship. And if they were just dropping the bombs on the ships, the bombs aren't powerful enough yet to really do anything they could weaken it, but they couldn't sink it. So what they start to do, and this is where Mitchell was a pretty good military strategist, he's like, if we drop it near the ship, right, and use the water, right, to basically you have the attack from the water and the bomb, right, it's going to blow a hole in the side of it. And sure enough, they do. And Moffat's like, well, that wasn't the rules of engagement. And Mitchell's like, well, next time we're fighting the Germans, they're not going to follow rules of engagement. They're just going to sink our ships, right? If the ship's going to be in water no matter what. So, so Mitchell argued the conditions, like I said, we're actually part of war, right? So we need to take this seriously. And so he uses this test and future tests to argue his point. I will tell you, many in the press are like, maybe Mitchell has a point here, right? But again, the government is slow to move on this. So Mitchell angers enough people in leadership that they eventually send him on a mission to Asia. It was very much a get out of DC and don't come back. And they sent him on a fact-finding mission. At this point, the U.S. is in peaceful relations with China and Japan. They're really not hoping that he finds anything. But Mitchell, not to be deterred, goes to Asia and writes a whole report, ends up publishing it as a book called Wing Defense. You can buy it. It's an interesting read. And in it, he argues, he's like, the next war we have might be in the Pacific. And if it is, it's going to be Japan, because Japan wants resources and we want open markets in China. And they're like, what are you talking about? And he's like, who are they going, like, where were they going to attack in the Pacific? Which is really short-sighted again of the US government, because the US is in control of the Philippines at this point, which is not far from Japan, but also Hawaii. And so Mitchell argues in this book, he's like, Japan will attack the Philippines and Hawaii, and we need to have air defense, right? We need to have air defense and actually to protect, right, our holdings, right, in the Pacific. So he argues we need to modernize the Navy, we need more powerful ships, and we need to invest in air power. So this is the Shenandoah, right, to just give you kind of an idea. And you can see here, right, these poles, they almost look like cell phone towers, right? There were a couple different ways that you could get into these ships, right? One was if it was low enough to the ground, right, and you weren't terrified, right? They did have a basket, right? That was an idea, right? They could do, but that wasn't really the ideal way to do it. What you could do is you actually like kind of took this up, and if you look here, so picture here, this actually folds down, right? And you could walk into the nose of it, right? You could walk into the nose of the ship. I've actually seen parts of like the fabric, right, that was used, right, that would come down. A guy who does glass repairing owns it, right? He found it at an auction. So this was the Shenandoah, right? So these are the ships, right, that are being debated. So in 1925, what happens is it's on a PR mission, right, to go over parts of the country, right? It's in Ohio. And the Ohioans attending the fair down the road in, this is around Noble County, right? So we're talking Caldwell, Ohio. They rush to the scene, right? So one night, right, it's flying over, right, gets caught in a storm, right, gets ripped apart. And what happens is that these fairgoers and these county residents find out about this, and they want to come see the airship, which I actually understand that, right? This thing is like almost 700 feet long, right? They want to come and see what this looks like. And they had been seeing this in the news, right? This was like a technology, right, that they had seen a lot of. So what happens though almost immediately is they begin taking souvenirs from the ship and also the dead bodies of the crewmen, right? And so this is where the vandalism enters, right, into the equation. The National Guard is eventually called out to protect the ship, but most of it is carried away by locals. We're talking truckloads of this thing is actually taken away. Fabric, parts of the metal frame, which was aluminum, the steering wheel, right? I mean, all kinds of different things. The ring from Zachary Lansdowne, who we're going to talk about in just a second, he was the captain. It goes missing. I've heard accounts, I've never been able to verify this, but his hat was put on display in a local shop, right? So there is a lot of vandalism, a lot of souvenir hunting, right, that happens almost immediately after this. And you can see, right, I mean, we have photos in the back here, and people have brought photos. You can see just the massive amount of crowd, right, that is building around it. And if you look here, right there, where the star is, this was a section that people really wanted parts of. They wanted parts of the star fabric because it was shiny, right? It was one of the cooler parts of the ship. So here's some photos, right? And we can look at these very quickly. So this is a crowd, right, towards the end of the ship, right? You see where the propeller is, right? They've gathered around this, right? And they are taking souvenirs. They're getting their picture taken. Here they are on top of it, right? And so if you look here, down here, this is the actual outer, the rigging, right, that held it together. This is very common, right? You find these in makeshift museums. The high school I went to, Shenandoah High School, had a piece of this in the doorway. And you can just see, I mean, they're just literally ripping it apart. Here is, dressed up nicely, getting a photo, right, in front of the airship. Here's the National Guard, right, once they get called in, and you can see they have a rope, right? It's like you're not allowed to go in here. And then here's another picture of a National Guardsman, right, also standing guard over it, right? If you look through enough of these photos, though, even the National Guard, I don't know if they took souvenirs, right? I've never found anything about this, but they start to pose for photos themselves, right? They have their guns out, right? And posed in front of it. And so there was this kind of souvenir mania, right, that was going on with the ship. So Mitchell is furious about this. He goes public, chastising the military and government, says the wreck of the Shenandoah is proof that the U.S. leadership, that bad decisions were being made that were costing servicemen's lives. He was good friends with the captain of the USS Shenandoah, Zachary Lansdowne. So Lansdowne and Mitchell were good friends, and whereas Mitchell was like the bad boy of the military and would run his mouth, right, and get in trouble, Lansdowne was the golden boy, right? He was like Time Person of the Year, right? I mean, he was on Time cover when the National Geographic goes with them. they get a lot of photos with him. And so when he dies, right, this is also personal. So bad decisions are being made to prioritize spectacle and not take air technology seriously. And on top of this, the media, right, the media runs a circus with this, with the vandalism. So Mitchell's court-martialed for his insubordination. There's a trial. Lansdowne's wife, Margaret Betsy, right, testifies that Lansdowne took the trip under duress, that he did not want to do it. Public opinion is divided, but there is support for the victims of the wreck and for Mitchell. There's generally a consensus that there was a cover-up and trying to be had. So what happens is that as things kind of, they're able to get Mitchell in a couple different, verbal traps, and he's found guilty of insubordination because he was insubordinate. He was guilty of that. And so he's given a 5-year suspension, and he quits at that point. He quits. He eventually is going to join the FDR administration, though, as a civilian leader over military affairs. There's a film about this called The Court Martial of Billy Mitchell. It's not very good, but Gary Cooper plays Billy Mitchell, and you can see here, right, the Lansdownes are pictured very handsome and young, right? They were actually very close in age, right? But Hollywood. So what we see then is the rise of air power is seen as a major technological feat for humans and particular nations. We want to remember it. This is the Smithsonian, right? And we also have democratic memory, right? So we're going to discuss this, right? This is a piece, right, of fabric, right? And this is a signaling flag that was turned into a pillow, right? And so you see all kinds of memorabilia, right, that are made. So this becomes an issue, right? Disturbing the dead for a memorial's sake, is it always unethical? Is it an unjust memory? Why or why not? When I talk to people about this and they hear about the ring and the hat being removed, they recoil. But this is in Indianapolis, right, where pieces of the World Trade Center are on display, right? And you see this throughout, right? So again, where people died turned into a memorial. If you're interested, the Rainer Museum on Wheels, right, they are fascinating people. I love Teresa to death. They have actually turned they're in Avo, Ohio, where it wrecked, into a makeshift museum where they literally just drive it around to schools and things like that, and have pieces of it in the trailer. And they're great. They can always talk to you. And so beyond institutions, memory is preserved by residents, right? So this is at the 100th anniversary, right? It's supported by the community. And this here is a granite stone where Lansdowne, his body was recovered, right? Like I said, annually, it's not annually, it's every 5 years they hold a ceremony. And so yeah, so that's what I have here, right? So thoughts, how should we collectively remember something like this? The people who vandalized the ship, the leaders who sent it on a mission, and the people who come afterwards, right? Who are still taking care of these memories. So thank you so much.
Exhausted. So much energy. I'll bet some of you have some questions for Wes. Anybody have questions? Yeah.
Who manufactured the ship?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd have to check into this. It's 1919 that they put it out, and they lay pieces of it. Alcoa gets the contract to dismantle it. But I don't know, if you can find one from, that's a good question. I actually don't know what company they go through to work with, because it's aluminum. It's a massive amount of aluminum and helium that is used to construct it. So I'm not sure what company they go through. It is the U.S. Navy, right? But I forget who gets the contract.
Where was it constructed?
Lakehurst, New Jersey, is where it was largely assembled. Yeah.
If you go down to that town, is there a trail or a path that you could walk out?
There's a monument right off the road, and as I understand, the memorial used to be out in the field, but then they relocated it to the side of the road, because where it lands is just fields, right? It's just people's fields. And so, understandably, people are like, please don't come out to my field, right? Not that, really, it's not that they even, because I've talked to like owners and things, they don't mind. But it's, if you just have like the general public traipsing through your field and they get hurt, and then you have to go find them, right? So as you go down the interstate, you can see the sign, one of the signs for the site. And then if you get off and follow the signs, you can go to Site 2, which is pretty accessible. And that's where the stone is with Lansdowne, where the body was recovered. But inside of Ava itself, there's not much left, right? It's like a very small community that there's just a couple houses now. They have a large granite memorial, right? That's nice to check. They've done a good job keeping it up. And again, it's largely the Rayner family, right? The Rayner family are the ones who have shown interest in this and kept the memory kind of alive. They've organized the reunions. They bring the descendants in of the crew, right? And so they do a very good job with it.
Were they related at all to anybody that had?
The Rayners? Brian's father, was young when it happened. They lived in Ava. They're Ava natives, right? And so it happened there. Brian got interested in it. He's since passed. And Teresa, we'll talk about it, she was like, when I started dating him, I was like, what is this? and so they ran a gas station, car shop type thing, right? So they were just locals. I mean, again, very democratic memory, right? Just people, it happened in their community and they've kept the memory alive. Yeah.
You said that people removed the bodies from the site. What did they do with them? Take them to local mortuaries?
So no one actually removed any of the bodies in terms of like the vandals, right? If we want to use that term. But what happens is that many of the locals actually help get the bodies. The government shows up, right? National Guard, and they're taken to Cambridge and then loaded on a train, right? And so you can find photos of it with the coffins, right? It's like 14 members are killed, right? And so they are shipped back to where they're going, right? I mean, I think Lansdowne he's from Greenville, Ohio. I think he ends up being buried in DC though, but I would need to check that. So.
Was there a national memorial service for this event?
So yes and no. The Coolidge administration and the military don't want to talk about it too much. And the local community also doesn't want to talk about it because there is kind of outrage at the vandalism. Yes, though, they try to get his wife, Lansdowne's wife, to kind of be like the good widow, and she doesn't play ball with him, and she's like, absolutely not, you took this under duress, and you're trying to manipulate me, and they're like, oh, well, thank you for your service, get out of here, right? And so Mitchell and her, like I said, they were friends, right? They kind of lead the charge, right? And so at that point, you do kind of have a government, a cover-up, as much as like a 700-foot balloon landing right in Ohio, right? But they do try to downplay it, right? I've read this before, and I don't know how accurately it was followed, but Alcoa gets the contract to dismantle the ship, right? Because it's a lot of aluminum. But they're told they can't keep anything to make it into, it has to be repurposed, right? You can't keep like a piece of it. I don't know how much like people actually did that at Alcoa, like if they like kept pieces for themselves. That is a stipulation that is supposedly given.
You said it's in the Smithsonian?
The Smithsonian has pieces of it, now. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes?
That one picture it showed, did they actually have it anchored to a battleship?
It could, yeah. There were times, and you can see photos of it, right, where they would fly in, right, into a naval ship, right, and they could anchor themselves to that, right, if they wanted, yeah. The Shenandoah was planned to actually do an expedition to Antarctica, and they were all gung-ho, like this is going to be like the thing. And it gets like damaged in a storm like before, and you're like, well, maybe not, right? And so if you look at some of the photos, I think it's in Los Angeles, there's a very famous one where it flies into like I said, almost like the cell phone tower looking tower. And it's docked there. Wind came up, a bad windstorm came up, picked it up, right? And so at one point the ship is actually like straight down, pointed down, right? And then comes back down the other side and rips it from the mooring. There's another one, I think it might be Macon or Akron, I can't remember. They're holding it. The naval enlisted guys are holding it, and a gale comes along and pulls it off. And a lot of them were smart enough to just let it go, right? But there's one group, right, that actually holds onto it, and it shoots up into the air. Several of them fall off, right, and die, or injured, and then die, right? Some of them die. There's one guy who just holds onto it, right? And so you can see photos of this where they're like trying to get him up in the ship, and this poor naval sailor, right, is just like holding on for dear life. And so, again, very dangerous, right? Very impractical. Yeah. Yeah, in the back.
Earlier you were talking about democratic monuments leading to the military. I think a good example of that is the monument at Shanksville, where the plane went down. We went there when it was fresh. You had to drive through a field with a handmade sign that's pointed up there. Past construction equipment They brought in a logging cabin and set it there. And then the neighbors would man the cabin and explain to people what happened. Homemade photographs of everything that was there. You could see the crash site 400 yards away, which weren't allowed there. But there was a fence there. Where people put their flowers and all the stuff. Then that led to what it is now, which is a marble slab showing you the flight plan, parking lots, bus places for tourists to do buses and everything. And the Democratic one was very touching.
Yeah.
Now it's just a...
So I'm glad you brought up Shanksville. There's a really good book called From Memory to Memorial. We're getting ready to go over it in my class here in a couple weeks. And in it, the author, and I'm blanking on his name, but it's called From Memory to Memorial. He makes the same argument, and he's one of these writers who have kind of offered this like democratic versus authoritative memory, and he says the same thing. He's like, the democratic memory was actually after 9/11 trying to heal, trying to tell these stories. With the authoritative memory, and the families of the people on the plane do want government recognition, but it becomes very. The argument is, right, it becomes more sterile, it becomes more official, right? And people aren't given the space to naturally mourn that they would have. So yeah, if you're looking for a good book that discusses that, he gets into all kinds of different memorials, school shootings, right? When school shootings happen and memorials are created, how the students just naturally remember things versus how the school or the state will then come in and create a memorial, and he compares them, right? He compares the two. I think I saw it right here, the green jacket. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
My mother saw it happen. She and her family were down there camping outside of Maine for that festival, where the fair was.
It was a county fair, yeah.
She was like 14 at the time, and her sisters and her mom, and that storm kicked up, and they were, I said, oh my God, look in the sky, and there it went.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started working on this in college, right, obviously, like went to OU, a lot of people were around, right? And it was very interesting because people had stories of it from their parents or grandparents, right? But then also how memory becomes fuzzy, right? And people don't mean to, right? But I don't know, I think I had at least 5 or 6 people tell me it blew up and was on fire. And I'm like, well, that's the Hindenburg, right? But it was just, that's how they remember it, right? It's like, yeah, shit blew up. I think I saw that. Right? And so, but yeah, there's a lot of memory, right? And if you go into southeastern Ohio, like you go into auto repair shops, right? Grocery stores, schools, libraries, they just have pieces of it, right? Because although a lot of it is carted away, and then the U.S. government's like, you're going to return that, right? Because it didn't belong to you. They offer kind of an amnesty day with like, if you bring it on this day to Cambridge, no, you won't get in trouble. So people bring out truckloads of it, right? Of what they took. Other people hold on to it because they're afraid that they're going to get in trouble, and also they want a piece of it, right? It's the other part. And so, yeah, I was just at the 100th anniversary, and there was a guy who came. He's like, yeah, this was my grandfather's. It was like he said it was the steering wheel. I don't know if it was in one of the control cars or not, but he was like, basically, the sheriff and him, his grandfather, were like, go get that, right? So, and then the sheriff's like, hide it, don't tell him, right? And so it just like stays in a barn, right, for the next 100 years. And so finally made its public debut again, right, at the 100th anniversary. And I think they're going to do a makeshift memorial for it at the county commissioner building. I think that's what they had said. Again, it was very hot and they were talking very quickly, but that seemed to be the plan of what they were going to do with the steering mechanism.
What's the name of that book again?
From Memory to Memorial, about Shanksville. Very good book. Very, very good book on public history. Yeah.
About the 4th slide in, you had a large stone bed.
Yeah.
What is that? Where is that?
Let me go back here. Tell me when. Right here. This is if I remember correctly, a Soviet memorial. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a memorial that the Soviet Union put up somewhere in Eastern Europe. I have to look again at it. It's been a minute since I've used this slide, but yeah, the Soviets are a good example of this, right? Where you have, especially in Germany or Eastern Europe, right, these massive memorials that are put up that Eastern Europeans initially don't really want, right? And a lot of them come down after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Some still exist, right? But yeah, it's a Soviet memorial. This is, I believe this is 9/11, I think, maybe, or Princess Diana. I'd have to look more closely. But yeah, it's an example of democratic memory. Yes?
So, did Mitchell turn out okay when he joined FDR's administration? Did he get a job somehow?
Yeah, he got a job because mostly there was this like sense that he had been done wrong, right? And FDR, right, was like, come, you stuck it to the Republicans. Come join my administration, right? Honestly, Mitchell doesn't do a lot. I mean, he does stuff, but he's not the firebrand, right? Like that he had been. I mean, he just kind of does his job, right? And so, I mean, by that point though, FDR is like, it's heavier than air, and everyone else was. I mean, when the Hindenburg wrecks and blows up, I mean, everyone around the world is just like, this is just not working, right? And so, I mean, it's largely abandoned at that point. And in FDR's papers, if you look through it, right, it's so fascinating, right? Because FDR writes like oh, sorry, Hitler. And Hitler's like, thanks, Frank. It's like, I mean, it's like this like very nicety of like, oh, so sorry, but they both like already hate they don't like each other, right? So it's like, talking past one another. So, but to answer your question, I mean, he just kind of, serves out his time, right, in the Roosevelt administration, right, trying to modernize the Air Force, yeah, and lead to the creation of the Air Force, yeah.
So Mitchell did get to work in the Air Force then?
So he works, I think, I'm trying to remember, he's a civilian leader by that point. I'd have to look at his specific office, I forget, but no, he is not as instrumental as some of the other like military commanders like Eisenhower and other people like that. I mean, I'm not a military historian, so check me on this, but I do not think he is as important as some of the other later figures. But why he's considered the father of the Air Force, right? Why he's considered the father of the Air Force is because of the theories that he's offering, right? And he was absolutely right. I mean, about how heavier than air was going to be used, right? This is where it gets dicey with Mitchell, right? So before he gets court-martialed, there is the Battle of Blair Mountain, right? Where the miners rise up, right, and are like fighting. And so he wants to demonstrate how good air power could be. And he's like, hey, we have these planes, let's bomb the miners, right? And so let's use military technology against a civilian force. What ends up happening is they break the strike, right? I mean, like the Sheriff's National Guard, et cetera, right? And I believe air power is used in that strike, but it's not Mitchell. Yeah, it's not Mitchell who gets to it. They basically beat him to it, right? But Mitchell's a troubling story, right? Because whenever you start to go, oh yeah, and they're like, oh, it's like, I mean, it's kind of sad, like how quickly this technology's developed, right? Like the Wright brothers are, designing this, and there are military people down at Kitty Hawk, right, like interested in weaponizing this. And so going from let's be able to fly, right, to let's bomb civilians, right? I mean, it's like pretty fast, right? Like how they get there, right? So yeah.
How about if we save any of the rest of the questions?
I'll hang up here. Yep.
Be here.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming, and oh my goodness.